I want to thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar on IPA reports, a brand new presentation for us. And with that, I give you Jeremy and Jeff.
And thank you so much for tuning in to us today. We're going to talk a little bit about IPA reports and a few of the things that you can do both manually and built in, and some cool little features that you have along the way with your reports. It's a common question that people ask. How can I get this data about my work units that are constantly running in IPA? And how can I make better decisions about my flows and what I'm going to do with them?
Yeah, so we're just looking to tackle some of those simple questions, or sometimes they're a little bit more complicated questions about all the work unit data that gets generated from all the work units that are processing in your system.
So the first thing we're going to talk about are the business classes. Let's take a deep look into that work unit screen. We all double click on the work unit and we see all those tabs along the side. But where does all of this data reside, and what exactly does it mean? So I'm going to go through these. I understand that you can read what's on the screen. I get that. But I'm going to explain what each of these business classes mean and what they do, and some of the things to look out for. Starting with Pfi Activity, the very first one, and you have activity nodes. If you have activity logging turned on in your process, you're going to get a lot more than just one coming into your activity node in Pfi Activity. Another item that logs to Pfi Activity, you know how you want to get that error message unchecked on your flow? So you just check continue process and custom log entry. Where does the custom log entry go? It goes into Pfi Activity. You can query that and retrieve those custom log data items that were written. All of your variables, easy, the Pfi work unit variable. One thing to note about all of these, as you query the data, everything's built into a module. These are all contained within the Pfi module when you do your landmark transaction builder. Pfi work unit variable contains all of the variables that were assigned into the work unit. Maybe your service delivered them, maybe it was your channel, but you can go after that table and get anything that you want. All of your error messages are contained in Pfi error message, and they will go sequentially. Yesterday during Next, we talked a lot about input data. And if you wanted to store large values from a message builder, you could use the input data. You could query that by using the Pfi work unit input data business class. Also your channels. You know, whenever you set up a channel, you select either file name, file data, or file line. That is all stored in Pfi work unit input data business class. Your logs, now these can get very large, so be careful with your querying. But if you go to the Pfi work unit business class, go to the log field, you will be able to retrieve your logs with a query.
The Pfi message business class holds the data that basically the system allows users to input additional data into that work unit as it's processing. So it's sitting in there in basket, and they can add additional comments. Sometimes those comments get used put onto maybe a requisition header as additional comments on that requisition, or whatever you can do with them in your flow. But they are available to retrieve and report off of.
It's worth noting though with Pfi message, that's not the same as that message box that'll appear if you take an action and you can put in a reason comment or a reason message. Those are not stored in the Pfi message business class, and we'll get to where they're stored here in just a moment.
Yeah, and typically that's a functionality that's available with your S3 product line. So as you're looking at the in-basket, there's a separate messages tab available to you. With the Pfi work unit folder, again, this is actually a way this carried through from process flow in version 9, but it was a mechanism for people to enter links. So you could enter a link to a network folder, and then that kind of got passed with the work unit and was visible to other approvers down the line. With a landmark application, this actually, so an action request screen, for example, this actually stores the application URL that's required to go back to that action request forms with the specific details about the transaction.
So one tab that we didn't cover in that last slide was probably the most important one of all, and that was the user actions. And we couldn't put it on one because there are numerous business classes associated with that user action from your work unit tab. So if you double click on the user action and you get to the screen, you have this second line of detail here. And if you go to the Actions tab, then you'd be looking at the Pfi Metrics business class. So you can see what users and tasks have been assigned, and this is where you can get those reason codes and comments coming from either GHR or S3. You can retrieve them. In your flow, of course, you can use the messages variable as well, or a comment. I can't remember what the variable name is off the top of my head. But if you want to query the business class and get to it, you can. We also talked yesterday in Next a little bit about Pfi Metrics and how you could build with it in your emails out to approvers, how the actions that the user has taken. And Jeremy was mentioning that you'd use Pfi Metrics.
Yeah, you're basically building out a list of that approval chain of who's already approved it.
If we look at the detail of our user action, we're going to be really getting into the Pfi queue. Where is this particular user action in a queue? Now remember, we could have multiple people assigned to a work unit, and that'll come a little bit later. But this is each activity that we have on from Pfi Metrics. You can see that there's a lot of detail in here about your reminders and your timeouts, and also what actions were taken. So if you need to query the actions taken, you're going to go to the Pfi queue business class. The Pfi queue task says what task it was assigned. We all know that when we use a user action within IPA, we have to assign it either to a user or a task. Now, one thing to notice, and this question gets asked quite frequently, is the caret and the number after the task field. And that's because a user action or a task both write to the same field. The caret 1 or the caret 2 indicates whether it's a user or a task. 1 indicates a user and 2 indicates a task. So you can see here in this case on the screen that we have a task and not a user. But if we queried the Pfi queue task business class, the task would not look like that. It would just have that gobbledygook text. But then we would have another field that would indicate what type of task it was.
In landmark, it's stored as a compound field, so the screen renders it together in this case.
The Pfi queue reminder task relates to the timeout and notify tabs that you would normally see in your designer. If you want any information about your reminders or your timeouts, you can go there. The activity variable is going to store all of your variables that you use throughout the flow whenever you have an assign. And you know how sometimes if you run a query and you do a user action, then you come out of the user action, your data's not there. It's because the flow is suspended its processing and it's relying on memory. But if you use that assign node, it writes out, and then magically after the user action is done, you have access to that variable. That's because it's stored in the Pfi Activity variable business class. If you want to see the status of your assign node variables as they go through a flow, you can certainly write a report on the Pfi Activity variable and get that.
So we've looked at all this data, and the question comes up, well, what's that going to tell me? What can I do with that data? So the Pfi queue reminder, for example, and even if we go back to some of these other screens here, looking at all of the metrics and the reminders and the time and all of that stuff, you can actually query all this data and pull it in and say, okay, how often is my first reminder being sent? How often is my second reminder being sent for a requisition approval flow or for any approval flow? And see, again, just to identify those bottlenecks in your process and try to understand, okay, why does a requisition approval flow take 3 days to process or take 5 days to process? And so you can pull that data, collate it, and average it out and look at, okay, 90% of the time we're sending both reminders. So we either need to review, it helps you make your business decision then on what you need to do to improve that process.
So now let's talk a little bit about tracking, and this is going to be more for S3 folks dealing with requisition type flows. If you notice whenever you create a user account that there is a box that says include tracking link, and if you check this, then the user would be able to look at their work units and then find out where the flow is and where it has been, but not where it is going in the future. That's not here yet. And I believe we have a question. We're going to stop momentarily.
We do. I think you said you would look in PFQ table for the action taken. How is this different from the action of information stored in the PF Metrics? Or did I misunderstand?
No, some of the data is similar between the two. The PFQ table kind of stores it in progress as the system's processing it, and the PF Metrics captures it once that user has taken that action. But the queue will show it before, as it's pending, waiting for that user to take action.
Hopefully that answers your question. So in the tracking, if we double click into one of those work units, then we can get details about the specific user action, similar to what you would see in your rich client or in your web-enabled client. But this is from a user's perspective, looking at their approval level in S3.
And again, it gives the submitter the ability to look into the due date, so that's your escalation time period. And again, if you're querying all this for reporting, you can write reports off of this data that say, okay, how many approval tasks are approaching that due date? So how many before those things get escalated? When we talk about the global HR application or any of the landmark-based applications, there's a link called My Actions. And this basically shows you any actions that you as a user have submitted, whether it would be a scheduled event, such as a scheduled process flow, or an action request that you might have kicked off within the system. And within this screen, you can see the status. That last column shows the status there, whether it's still in progress or not in progress, or if it's been completed. Or it will show as rejected as well if the action request has been rejected. So again, this is a way for the user to be able to just get information about what's going on with the work that they are concerned about, because it's the work that they've submitted. And also there's a link then to the work unit itself, where it kind of gives them a slimmed down view of some of the details about the work unit, so the tracking, and again, where it's at in the approval process. Then we go into there's a action pending work unit screen, and this would be available to anybody, to the administrators, but also anybody that might have the read-only, the process server read-only role. And it basically says, here's all of the work units that are waiting for somebody to take action. So it gives you that big list. And again, as we talk through and show screenshots of lists, remember that any of these lists in Landmark can be exported to CSV. So you can take that data, because the screen's only going to show X number of records at a time, maybe 20 records or so. But when you export it to CSV, it will dump everything. So you do need to be careful with that, because depending on how much work is in your system, it might take some time to generate that list, but it will be the complete list. And then you can filter it by process and status and services. And even that last column has the task or the user associated with that work unit and who it's waiting for.
So now we're going to move into a little bit of analytics. So those were things that you could do manually with your reports. Now we're going to get into some more automation, things that are a little bit easier for you to generate the reports. So the first thing that we want to talk about is a couple command line options, maybe that you didn't know about. There's an IPA Diag command line option. Cloud customers may not be able to have this feature available to you, but on-premise does. Maybe you want to get a database count. This might be very important to you as an administrator of your Landmark system on-premise. What are the counts of my database? I want to monitor the size. So you can run the IPA Diag for your data area with a -d parameter and get counts of key database tables within your IPA system. The second one on the right, with the WS option, gives you the work unit status. So you get a count of how many work units are in a specific status. Perhaps key on the failed category. In this case, it's perfect. It has 0, but that's not every day. So if you see this number growing, then you might have a problem with your system and cause you to go and look further. But you can run this utility with your syscommand node, export the results out into an email to you as the system administrator every day, and then you have all of this data right there at your fingertips.
So then we go back into the application and we look at this process server administrator screen that comes up and has a nice pie chart in it, and there's not a lot of information here at first, but you can actually get a lot of information out of it if you put a little bit of effort into this screen and kind of dig through it. So with the status screen, this screen allows you to create this graph of different statuses. So now for this example, I've selected only the failed and processing, and I'm only showing those. But you can add additional states to this chart, and again, that would be all the process server built-in states that are available, so processing, failed, canceled, those types of things. And then when you click on one of those graph sections, it actually brings up those work units associated with that status for you. So by me clicking on the failed section in the pie chart, it brings up on the right-hand side all of the failed units. And then I can start digging into them and looking into them a little bit closer to try to troubleshoot and understand, okay, what do I need to do? What are my next steps with this? You can take this screen a step further. Actually, with Configuration Console, you can add additional information here. So you can see in this example, I've added the task name, and now task it's a related field. So you have to get a little creative with your Configuration Console and actually reference the last referenced task name, and that'll show you the current status of where it's sitting at. And then you can take that list after you clicked on, so in this example, I've clicked on the processing, and I've filtered this list by the task name, and I can see here's all the tasks that are sitting in this, or here's all the work units that are sitting in this particular task. And then again, you can report off of that and use it however you need to support your data. If we look at the Analytics tab, there's actually some pretty cool things that you can do here. You can take the data, so in the upper left-hand quadrant here, I'm looking at, here's basically all my active work units. So it's just 4 columns, just slimmed down. It's giving me the work unit number, the process, the status, and how long, the elapsed time. So if it's still processing, obviously that counter is going to continue. But you could take this list, you could filter it by completed, and then you can actually take these work units that are in that section and move them down to the comparison work units. So under the Actions menu, there's an option to create comparison work units, and it puts them down into this other section. And then what it's doing is it's basically analyzing for you the execution time of all of those different work units. So in this example, this is an action request workflow, and it's looking at, I've got 5 work units selected here, and I can see the processing time associated with each one and kind of compare and contrast it. Looks like we have a question.
We have a couple, actually. And this one we may need to do a little follow-up, but I'll go ahead and let you try to tackle it. Our company would like to use IPA to create reports. However, not all users to these reports have access to IPA. Is there a way to trigger these reports by a user without access to IPA? I know that there's an option to do that using custom Java apps or LPL. Right now, we're looking for alternatives like adding a custom process and rich client interface. Can Design Studio handle this? If yes, do you have some documentation? And then I'll just say, if we want to do a follow-up call, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, I would say that I'm just a little unclear what type of reports that you're specifically asking. If they're reports that are triggered from an action within a landmark application, or even S3 back office reports, Those can certainly be automated with IPA, looking at some of those actions, but it really just kind of depends on what specific data you're trying to pull out of.
Yeah,
those reports.
and we're trying to talk about reports that are managing IPA, reports of managing the actual system itself.
Okay, the next
Sorry,
one
we couldn't
is
answer
in
that
the
one.
action pending work units. Can we add a field from the work unit variable? For example, if the IPA is for personnel action, then show employee. If from new jobs requisition, then show the requisition number. Currently trying to do this from ISD. Thanks.
Yes, you can. You have to create a custom relation with config console, but I've done that specifically in the global HR application. I've done that with the effective date that's on the action request. So the effective date comes in as one of those work unit variables, and I've created a relationship between work unit and PFI work unit and PFI work unit variable based on that variable name, so that it specifically returns that action request, the effective date of the action request. So yes, there are ways that you can do that. Going back into this, just another example again. So this just shows the difference between a pie chart and a bar chart. But again, an example use case here would be, so you have an interface that runs on a daily basis. And you can select all of those. You can select that process looking for the completed status, which is what I've done here, and created comparison work units for all of those. And then it automatically generates that execution time bar chart. And I can see where my outliers are. Maybe most days it's processing at about 10 minutes, but maybe one day it runs at 20 minutes and you want to try to figure out why. Or one day it only runs for 1 minute, and because there was a problem with the database and it couldn't connect and couldn't read the database. So this just kind of gives you a little bit of insight into some of your execution of your interface flows as well.
So now we want to talk a little bit about what's called execution data. And there are two types of execution data, and how to get them on the screen, and then also how to automate them within IPA. If you go into Start and Process Server Administrator and Reporting, you're going to see that you have two options there for process reporting and task reporting. The process gives you the overall process statistics based on a date range and or specific processes or originators. So if you want to get the overall status of your work unit, overall data of your work units for a specific date range, you're going to use the process reporting. For task reporting, it's going to go down to the individual user level. Now notice the icons on here, so if you're doing this within the rich client, you'll go into the gears, the generate process report data or the generate task report data, and then you can specify your date range parameters. Once you're done with that, then you'll go to the second one on there, which is the list. You have the process report list or the task report list, and you'll get something that looks similar to this. Not exactly readable to you in its current form, but remember, anytime you click on the options button and you see export to CSV, you can get that data out into a readable format where you can manipulate it in a tool such as Excel or import into a database to manage it. But looking at this on screen, it really doesn't do a lot. But all of this data does go into a business class, which we'll reveal here in just a moment. A few things to note about generating this execution data is that your reports are cumulative. So that means that if you specify June 1 through June 30, and then in July, you specify July 1 through July 31, your June data is still there. So if you only want to do this monthly, you're going to want to delete all of the data prior to running your new report. If you run it daily and you're updating through the month, then your data for your specific date will overwrite. So today is the 7th of June, I believe. So I could run it right now, and then tomorrow I run it again. Work units have changed based on user actions and statuses. All kinds of different things happen with the work unit throughout the day. They will update. So now if you want to do this you want to do this delete task, you can use the PFI process report or PFI task or PFI process report or PFI task report business class and use the action of delete all to clear out your data instead of managing this on the screen. And then if you want to generate the data, populate those begin dates, end dates, and or process or originator, then you can use the PFI work unit business class and then use the method of generate process report data or generate task report data, and then populate your fields accordingly, which you can calculate the begin date using JavaScript within IPA.
So again, the screenshot of that data, and I think one key thing to note here with this data is that those generate functions automatically go through and kind of collate various business classes together all into one consolidated list for you. So it makes it easier to just bring in that metric. It brings in all the metric data, the statistics about the processing time, overall processing time. If you're looking at the task data, it goes down to the specific task execution time, so how long it sat waiting for a user to take action, things like that. So again, it's just bringing a lot of different business classes together into one giant list for you. So what do you do with that? So then you can take that data, and as Jeff mentioned, we can export it out to CSV, and we can take it one step further. So for anybody who is an Excel guru, I love to mess around in Excel and do a lot of formulas and calculations and things like that. So I've actually taken a data dump, and I've actually from that process data and the process data and the task data, and created some summaries like this. So here I'm looking at the different processes, and I'm actually counting the number of completed processes that I'm looking at, and looking at the average time that it takes for any one of these processes to execute. So the top half here, I'm looking at specifically action request work units within GHR. So my time interval that I'm really looking at or concerned with is days. So I'm looking here, and I see on average it takes about 14 days to process a termination request. So that allows me to, again, see where my bottlenecks are in my system, what process improvement that we can build into our processes to improve efficiency and just to make our system work better for us. The bottom half here, I'm looking at specific interface flows. So again, average time to complete, you're looking at minutes, hopefully not hours, but sometimes it is. But it gives you a better understanding, okay, average an hour and a half for this particular interface file. And if we ever then see that it runs 3 hours one day, then we know we've got a problem, and we can look into that a little bit further. Down at the very bottom section here, I've actually broken it down and done some statistics on the tasks themselves. So on average, we're looking at the compensation analyst. On average, it's taking 2 days to process things through their in-basket. So that's not looking at any one specific process, but everything that's coming in through the comp analyst task. And then if you like pictures and graphs, just to kind of show high level and just give that kind of status or that dashboard of where things are at, then you can build charts and graphs off of that data once you've got it all in. And then the cool thing is, once you've identified those pieces that you want to be able to report off of and show in this format, you've got that template in Excel created. And then the way I set this up was create a tab for my charts. I created a tab for my calculations and generating the statistics, and then 2 other tabs, one for each of the CSV exports. And so you could just delete that data and reload, copy paste new data into it when you regenerate that data from the system. So at this point, we'll take any additional questions.
We have one.
Okay.
Actually, we answered that one. Sorry. We do have one more. Sorry. And another. Are the reports you are showing all in IPA Designer?
In the IPA design, oh, the Excel reports, no. But how to execute that raw CSV data, yes. You would use those methods of generate the process data on the PFI work unit business class to get the raw data, and then you can take them and import them into a reporting tool that you have to get it into that really pretty readable format.
Yeah, and that's done just using the standard landmark transaction node within Process Designer.
Okay. We are having an issue getting the work unit purge process to work. Are you aware of some common pitfalls in running the utility? Ours ran for hours to just purge a month of data, and it's never completed. Then we looked for the job and it was gone. The admin could never find it.
I know that I've used the purge, the prune and purge and move to history. I don't know that I specifically run into problems. I mean, it just depends on the volume of data. It could be that
That could be grid tuning too.
it could be a grid tuning thing where you need more memory within your grid. So one thing to watch while that's running would be your grid nodes to make sure that they're not exceeding the heap size or crashing on you.
All right, excellent. I want to thank Jeff and Jeremy for a wonderful presentation.